This week, we're diving into a forgotten chapter of baseball history, the heartbreaking story of the 1946 Spokane Indians bus crash. It's a tale of young players chasing their baseball dreams only to face an unimaginable tragedy that changed their lives and the game forever. Author Eric Vickrey joins me to talk about his book on this topic, entitled Season of Shattered Dreams. This is an episode about more than just baseball. It's about loss, survival, and how the game we love has been shaped by moments both triumphant and tragic. Let's get into it today on Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. I am your host, Jeff Lambert. Today, we're going to be talking about the bus crash that changed baseball. And I'm joined to discuss this episode with Eric Vickrey, who wrote the book Season of Shattered Dreams, Post-War Baseball, the Spokane Indians, and a tragic bus crash that changed everything. Eric, thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Eric, before we jump into the topic of the book, I noticed that you are pretty deep into baseball history writing about it. Can you give us a little bit of background on you as an author, as a writer, and your interest in baseball and history overall?
Of course. Yeah, I've been a baseball fan all my life. I grew up near St. Louis in a town called Alton, which is about 20 miles from St. Louis. So naturally, I grew up a Cardinals fan. But about 10 years ago, I moved out to Washington State, which is where I live now. And about 5 years ago, it's really during the early days of the pandemic, I began writing. I've always had an interest in writing and, of course, interest in baseball. So kind of used that time to start doing some writing. I wrote some articles that were published through the Society for American Baseball Research. And the more I went down that path, the more I enjoyed it. And that kind of evolved into tackling my first book, which I wrote a few years ago.
That's right. And it was on the St. Louis Cardinals, correct?
It was on the 1982 Cardinals.
And now this book, The Season of Shattered Dreams, this one's actually won some awards. I've seen that it was released last August, correct? And it's gotten some good headwinds behind it. Can you tell us a little about the reception since you released the book?
Yeah, it's been really positive. The book came out last spring, and it's kind of a forgotten story in baseball history that I think a lot of even diehard baseball fans don't know about, and myself was included in that. I didn't really know about this story until a few years ago. But yeah, it's been very well received by a number of baseball fans that I've talked to, and also family members of the people involved in the story have been very receptive and have received some positive feedback. So it's been a cool experience.
Before we get into the tragic event, can you tell us a little bit about the Spokane Indians?
Yeah, so Spokane has been home to minor league baseball since the late 1800s, and the team had been called the Indians since the early 1900s. So in 1946, they were a Class B team in the Western International League, which Class B was equivalent to like Single A in the kind of the current minor league structure. But it was a lot of players who were coming out of the war. A lot of the guys had just served in World War II. There were some other guys who were some pretty promising up-and-coming prospects for the Indians that year. They were an independent team, so they weren't affiliated with one specific organization, but they had prospects from the Yankees and then a couple of Pacific Coast League teams, the Oakland Oaks and San Diego Padres.
Now, walk us through the event, the tragedy that became synonymous with the team.
Yeah, so the season was going very well for the team. As I mentioned, they had a number of very promising prospects. They were about 2 months into the season. We're kind of in the thick of the pennant race. They had just come off a very electrifying victory on a Sunday afternoon against the first place team, the Salem Senators. And the Indians boarded a bus on June 24th, 1946, and they were headed to Bremerton, Washington, which is near Seattle, for their next series. And it was about halfway across the state that they were involved in this tragic accident. It was just before dusk in the Snoqualmie Mountains.
Now, a tragedy like this would destroy the climate, the culture, I think the will of a lot of teams to continue. What was the reaction after this event from both the team and the fans?
Yeah, so there were 16 of the 18 players on the team were on the bus. 9 of the players were killed. 6 players survived the accident, and 1 player, by just sort of incredible happenstance, was actually pulled off the bus in Ellensburg about an hour before it crashed. And then 2 other guys actually drove separately. So the team was decimated. Nearly half the team was killed. A number of others were severely injured. You had this basically 2 remaining healthy players, and then Jack Lorkey, the gentleman who was pulled off the bus. The reason he was pulled off the bus is he was actually getting called up to San Diego. So it was, sure, it made headlines at the time. It was big news across the country. I think it sort of devastated baseball across all, from Little League up to the major leagues. Teams held fundraiser games to raise money for the survivors and the families of the victims. So there were a lot of outpouring of support from across the country.
Your book mentions, the season of shattered dreams, obviously, related to this event, but you also mention in your book that this sparked some hope. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So, the book takes place in 1946, which another reason for the title too is that you had hundreds of ball players, thousands of minor league players, in fact, that were hoping to get back to like a sense of normalcy and resume their careers. And because of they had lost out on a few years of their playing careers during the war, many of them weren't able to sort of recapture the magic that they had before the war as players. And so their dreams were shattered. And of course, the Spokane Indians, a much more profound type of tragedy with this accident. There were some sort of fascinating things that came out of the accident. However, one of the players who survived, Ben Garrity, sort of used the accident as kind of a catalyst for his managerial prospects. He ultimately wanted to become a major league manager and felt that he had survived the accident, felt that he had a purpose in life after surviving this accident, and was determined to become a major league manager, and never reached that goal, but had a profound effect on Hank Aaron as he was coming up in the minors, and had a very successful, long minor league managerial career in the Brave system.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk to us a little bit about the book goes pretty deep into some insights into post-war America and baseball's role in that. Can you give us some snapshots of what your research uncovered?
Yeah, that was kind of something I learned during my research for the book, was just kind of the economic state of the country. I think we all think of, the war had ended, and, it was certainly a time for a celebration in the country. But that first year after the war, there was a housing shortage. There were a lot of industries went on strike. Wages were kind of stagnant. There were shortages on all kinds of goods and services across the country. A couple funny stories I read about, like I guess there's so little housing in Chicago that the White Sox offered season tickets to anybody who could help their players find housing for the season. So this kind of goes to show kind of how desperate some players were to find a place to live that season. So,
right, absolutely. Were there any other insights that you saw into how important baseball was to communities after the war?
Yeah, absolutely. In that era, there were something like close to 50 minor leagues across the country. Like nearly every small town in America had a minor league baseball, and this was before most homes had television. So, minor league baseball, in many ways, provided a form of entertainment for places across the country. So, the minor league teams, even if they were kind of lower level teams of guys who would never play in the majors, they were kind of like local celebrities, and that was certainly the case in Spokane. They, had 2 daily newspapers who were covering the team. I think their players were, sort of like I said, local celebrities with the team. That even made this accident even more, devastating, especially for the community of Spokane.
What ended up happening to the Spokane Indians after the crash? You mentioned, some of the surviving players went on to have longer careers. The team itself, did they continue on?
Yeah, remarkably, they did, which that kind of surprised me as I was researching the book. Is that the team started playing games again just a week after the accident, which uh, they had basically two able-bodied players. So the owner, a gentleman named Sam Collins, uh, basically held kind of open tryouts for semi-pro players, some players that had been released by other organizations, and he kind of scraped together a roster. Even the team's trainer played third base for a while, and a couple of the pitchers, the guys who drove separately, they played outfield on days they weren't pitching. Um, and with this sort of hodgepodge group of players, they did not perform very well. They were something like 30 games under 500 the rest of the way. But this was an independent team, and this gentleman, this was his business. So I guess you can understand why he wanted to resume playing,
Sure.
although it was under certainly trying circumstances.
Absolutely. And the community feedback, the community support of the team continued even after this crash, correct?
They did, especially on the nights when Milt Cadena and Joe Faria, those are the two remaining players on the team. Whenever they pitched, the team got huge crowds on those nights. They even had a fundraiser game that Casey Stengel, his Oakland Oaks, played the Seattle Rainiers in a fundraiser game that had a crowd of like 8,000 people that day and raised a bunch of money for the team. So it was very supportive, of course, the community of Spokane, as well as communities up and down the West Coast.
And during your research, you got in touch with families, descendants of some of the players that passed away and the ones that continued, correct? What was those conversations like? Were they aware of this connection?
Yeah, that was a really a fun part of the experience for me was um, talking to family members of some of the players, and of course, people alive now really didn't know these men. Of course, some of them tragically died in the accident. Others who survived, have since passed. So these were, in some cases, nieces, nephews, grandchildren who were able to provide some insights. And the cool thing was a couple of the families had kept scrapbooks that had letters and photographs. And that really helped sort of bring the players to life. And I was kind of able to include their voices into the book. One of the players, the youngest player on the team, Vic Pachetti, he wrote letters home to his mom throughout that season. And so you could kind of see what was going through his mind just day to day, from even things like what movies he went and saw on a given day to kind of what life was like on the road, riding buses across the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. Is there a specific player besides Vic that stands out in your mind as you did the research, maybe as a tragic what if they had survived, or just an interesting personal snapshot?
Yeah, Vic was certainly one of the more promising prospects and would likely have played in the big leagues. Another guy who I think kind of has been forgotten is Bob Patterson, who was equally talented prospect. He was a few years older than Vic. He had served in the Coast Guard during the war. He was like 23, I believe, when the accident occurred, and he died in the accident. But he was like 6'3", and he was described as kind of looking like Lou Gehrig. Was how the sports writers described him, but he certainly had a promising career ahead of him as well.
Now, I'm going back to the beginning on this. Where did you come up with the inspiration and the idea to write about the Spokane Indians? Where did this start for you?
That's a great question. Because I learned about this accident. Actually, I was writing an article about a player who played in, who got one major league hit. And his hit was off of a Bob Feller, a guy named John Leovich. And so I was like digging through newspaper archives. He played for a team out here in the Pacific Northwest in 1946. And I was just kind of looking through archives, researching for his name. And I came across this article about the accident. And it kind of struck me because it is a pretty profound tragedy and I'd never heard of it. So I think I ended up going to like Baseball Reference and looking at the team's page and statistics, and it's just a long list of names. There's not a lot of information there, and I think I came across Jack Lorke's sort of fascinating story, which is probably the most well known of the people involved in the story. But it kind of just stuck in the back of my mind for a while, for probably a good year or so before I really kind of dug into it. And the more I dug in, the more I became interested and felt it was a story that hadn't been fully explored or told.
Now that you've brought light to this event, what's your hope for baseball fans, for the general public to know more about what happened?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we remember um, our history. Certainly these were men who had just given several years of their lives in many cases to serving our country, and then they were just thrilled to be back playing baseball when this tragedy occurred. And although I think the accident, most people in the country probably knew about it at the time, I think it has largely been forgotten over the decades. I think part of that is because it did happen nearly 80 years ago, and it happened to a minor league team with not a lot of household names, and it happened in the fairly remote Pacific Northwest. It wasn't, in New York City or in a more populous area. So I think all those factors kind of played into why it's kind of been forgotten. But I do feel that it's important, that they're remembered, and also that I think it was important for in some cases for the family members involved too, just to have their relative stories told.
Absolutely. I'm sure the reception from Washington State fans and readers in general, just to hear about a local story, the reception there must have been very positive, correct?
It was, yeah. I was fortunate to be able to do a few events in Spokane. My first book signing was there, and actually, I got a surprise when a gentleman walked in he was in his early 90s, and he introduced himself and said that he went to several games that season and actually was friends with the team's bat boy, which was really cool to hear kind of his perspective, kind of firsthand account of that team. And it's been well received out here in the Pacific Northwest, and hopefully, as more fans learn about the book, they can check it out and learn about this forgotten team.
Where can fans pick up a copy of the book to learn more about this event?
It's available at most any online bookseller. My publisher is Rowman and Littlefield, so it's Rowman ROWMAN .com is the publisher, and you can of course find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, any of those places.
I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes and the description for people who want to check out the full book. Highly recommended. Have my copy right here next to me. Before we finish, Eric, I'd love to give listeners a little more of an opportunity to get to know you. Can we talk a little bit about where are the roots of your love for baseball? When did you decide that this was a sport that you really wanted to get interested in for the remainder of your life here?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't really remember a time when I wasn't a baseball fan. Although I do remember the first game I went to was August 10th, 1986. Of course, it was a Cardinals game at Busch Stadium, and I do vividly remember going to that game. Bob Forsch hit a grand slam that day. Vince Coleman stole 4 bases, and the Cardinals beat the Pirates. So that was probably the day I was really hooked, and then grew up a big fan of the game and always just enjoyed playing the game. Now that I'm a little older, I'm more just a couch potato fan and enjoy reading the history of the game and going to Mariners games out here in Washington, and also visiting minor league stadiums is a lot of fun as well.
Tell me about, you've written 2 books, you've written dozens of articles for SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. What's next for you? Are you working on any current projects? Can you give us a glimpse behind the curtain?
Yeah. I'm knee deep into a book about the Los Angeles Dodgers draft class of 1968, which is widely considered the best draft class in baseball history. And coincidentally, the players from that class, which included guys like Steve Garvey, Bill Buckner, Davey Lopes, Bobby Valentine. The list goes on. They all played in Spokane, actually, in 1970 for the Spokane Indians. So it was kind of a fun transition, a natural transition, I guess you'd say, as my next project. And I'm having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, it's, you're writing the sequel, essentially, the spiritual sequel.
Yeah,
I can't wait
exactly.
to read it. How can fans connect with you more, Eric? Do you have a website, social media, email? If people have questions as they pick up a copy of the book or listen to this interview, how can people connect with you further?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody who's interested in the book. I have a website. It's just my name, Eric Vickrey, which is VICKREY .com. And I'm also on social media for anybody who wants to connect that way.
Perfect. Great. And I'll include those in the description in the show notes as well. Eric, before we conclude, you grew up in Illinois. You currently reside in Washington State. Where do your allegiances lie? Who do you cheer for now?
So I'm pretty, I would say, equal Cardinals and Mariners, just in terms of the amount of time I dedicate kind of following each team. Of course, when they play each other, it's a little difficult. Thankfully, they're in opposite leagues, and neither of them have been very successful in recent years. So hasn't been much of an issue. If they ever played each other in the World Series, I'd be really torn, but I don't think I'll have to worry about that anytime soon. But being out here, so close to Seattle, definitely become a bigger Mariners fan, and they have a promising pitching staff. If they could ever find some offense, they might have a chance.
Do you have a prediction for the upcoming 2025 season? Who do you see winning the World Series?
Ooh. I mean, it's hard not to say the Dodgers. They're the best team last year, and they only got stronger during the offseason. And they're a lot of fun to watch. So, when the Mariners fall behind out here on the West Coast, I oftentimes flip over to the Dodgers and watch a better quality product.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just with the star power on that team, you can't afford not to miss a game.
Exactly.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
All right, Jeff, that sounds great. Thanks for having me.